You need to.
That's why I'm getting in.
Hmm?
I'm getting my book back
You're getting your book back from where?
from my house because like I accidentally when I
What do you mean your house? Don't you live at your house?
no, I'm temporarily staying somewhere closer.
Somewhere close around here?
Yeah.
Where's your home?
Here's some.
Huh?
Here's some.
Oh, okay. So you're going home just for that?
Well, it's important, so
I mean, I don't know. I don't know if... I'll check if there's an extra book.
no, it's fine.
No, I mean,
No,
that's
no,
that's
no,
a...
no, it's actually gonna come.
What?
No, I'm actually gonna get myself.
If it's a long trip.
No, but I have like other things to
Okay, fine. Okay, let's take a look at that test that we were looking at yesterday first. Did you not bring the test?
do. Oh no.
Okay. So everything from now on, any substantial writing should all be in your notebook. It shouldn't be on the test booklet. It shouldn't be next to the passage. It should be in your notebook. Okay. So let's take a look at the second passage. Second passage on the test. Okay. Okay. All right. So when it comes to the second passage, this is probably gonna be your easiest passage. Okay. So how should we deal with the easiest passage? Well, your focus should be, I mean, you should aim to read this in, I don't know about this passage. I'll have to take a look at this passage, but usually you want to read it within 2 to 3 minutes. The second passage. You don't want to spend too much time on it, okay? Because the reading is very sparse. The second passage is going to be extremely sparse. Like it's not going to have much information, and most of the time, the title or the beginning few sentences is a huge giveaway to you, and they stay in that way for a while. Okay. So what do I mean by this? Well, first of all, let's talk about like social science passages. Okay. Well, we talked about this before, but when it comes to social science passages, there are going to be two types of passages, right? So it's either opinionated, so like opinionated meaning it could be persuasive, or it could just be explaining something. Explaining a phenomenon or concept. So it's usually between these two things. But when it comes to opinionated ones, these are a little bit more difficult. So in terms of difficulty, this one is more difficult compared to the explain type, right? When it comes to the opinionated ones, they're usually going to have a minority point of view. What do I mean minority point of view? By minority point of view, I mean it's not going to be like a popular view that you thought about before. So like the example that I always used is when it comes to conventional crops versus organic crops or something like that. Usually people would prefer organic crops, but the social science opinionated passage would suggest that conventional crops are better or something like that. So something that you haven't thought about before. So it's going to offer a unique perspective on a pretty traditional subject. Okay, so that's usually the case. So another passage that we read before is it was talking about we need to make driving less agreeable. That was one of the passages. In order to have an environmental impact, in order to protect the environment, we need to make driving less agreeable. It was one of those passages, right? So it's not like we need to build more roads or anything like that. It's not reducing traffic. It should focus on making driving less agreeable or something like that. So it's usually going to be some kind of minority point of view. When it comes to explain passages, the thing that you should note is compared to science passages, they are going to ask you about the process. So process is relatively more important. So, well, I shouldn't say important, but I'm just going to say they're going to be questioned. Like in the questions, they're probably going to ask you about the experiment itself. Like what was the experiment group? What was the control group? What could we say about this and that? So there's going to be more detailed questions. But when you're reading it, you're not going to read it. When you're reading the passage for the first time, I want you to jump over all of this. Okay? So when you're reading a social science passage and it's an explained science passage and you have a bunch of processes, bunch of results, bunch of significances, you're going to jump over the process. That's what I want you to do when you're reading it for the first time, at least. Okay? And then when the question asks you about the process, then you're going to come back. Okay? So you're just looking for the read for the big picture. Okay. So you're just you're selecting information that you're trying to retain in your head. Okay. So you're not necessarily going to read all the nitty-gritties. You're not going to read the process and stuff. So just skip over that. Okay. And an important thing when it comes to social science passage is this. It all boils down to this. So build a sense of expectation. So this is probably the most important thing if you wanna speed up your process of reading. So if you wanna go through social sciences fast, well, it also applies to science passages, but you should be always actively trying to expect what's about to happen. And usually, a lot of times, the title suggests what's going to be in the passage, what's going to be what's going to be discussed in the passage. And if not the title, it's usually gonna be some part in the beginning. So once you get that expectation, once you build that sense of expectation, you want to speed up and look for the next part, next transition that's about to come. Okay? So once you know what's about to happen, then you should speed up and go down until there's a new kind of information block that comes up. What do I mean by this? Okay, so that's what we're going to practice. Especially when we're reading social science passages, it's all about expecting what's about to follow. Okay, so what can we see from the title here? So it says making space, how the brain knows where things are. Okay, so I guess it's going to be about like neuroscience a little bit, right? So it's talking about your brain and how your brain processes information, how the brain remembers where things are or that kind of thing, okay? So that's all I know. So I don't get much information here. I don't know, usually the pretty obvious ones are going to be like cause and effects. So if it says, oh, this causes this, then until you're done with this cause and effect, until we use this cause and effect up, until the passage mentions it, you're just looking for this. You're just trying to confirm your understanding of this. That's how you should read. But right now, we don't have that sense of expectation. So that's what I'm gonna try and build when I'm reading the passage. So let's take a look at the passage. And when we take a look at the passage, this is what I'm gonna try and do. I'm going to try and build expectation. Like, I want to be able to know what's coming. Okay, so it says the implication of the overlap. Okay, so there's an overlap between two things. Okay, so between two things, what are the two things? Areas of the brain responsible for cognition and areas responsible for sensory and motor processing. Okay, so there's an overlap. Like, so there are these two things, but there's an overlap, right? So one part cognition, and another part I'll just say motor processing. I'm just going to leave out sensory. So let's say, okay, so there's the motor processing and there's the cognition part, but there's an overlap, is what this is saying, right? And what does this mean? That's the implication, right? What are the implications? Implications meaning, so what do we get from this? What does this mean, right? Why is this important? In other words, the significance, right? So what can we know about this? Is that perhaps the operations of cognition are implemented at least in part. So, okay, operations of cognition are implemented in part by sensory and motor structures. Okay, so this affects this, right? That's what we're trying to say. So sensory and motor. So this is what I'm trying to say, right? Sensory and motor structures implement cognition. And so so when you're starting to read a passage, in the beginning, towards the beginning, especially in social science passages, there's going to be that important key piece of information that can frame your understanding of the passage. And that's why you want to slow down and you want to define terms clearly. You don't want to speed up here. If you get lost here, you can't speed up for the rest of the passage. You don't know exactly what's going on. So if you're going to speed up later. So right now, this is the important part. And then it says, that is perhaps, okay, so this part is just probably going to elaborate on what's already been said. So what's been said? Thinking also involves activating some subset of sensory and motor pathways of the brain. Okay, well, I have a question though. What does sensory and motor pathways mean? Well, right now, I don't know. I don't know what they are. I mean, probably you have some understanding of how the brain works and stuff like that, but you don't want to use your prior knowledge. So I'm just going to say, okay, there's sensory and motor pathways. So there's SMP, but I don't know what these are. But I see an example here. Okay? So this example can help you in this case, because it's going to be elaborating on this, and you can supplement your understanding of SMP using this information. So let's take a look. When you mentally picture sitting on the couch in your living room, that thought might be implemented partially by activating the visual, tactile, auditory, olfactory, and motor responses. Oh, okay. So it's saying thinking, right? Let's take a look. When you're mentally blah, 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 that thought is going to be affected by these. So these are probably going to be the sensory and motor pathways, right? So now I think I fully understand it. So it's not just like when you're thinking about something, it's only the cognition part of your brain working. It's the sensory and motor part. There's part of your brain that's responsible for what you hear, what you smell, what you can touch, what you look at, right? And how you move. But these are involved in thinking. That's what it is, right? So sensory and motor involved in thinking. That's all there is. That's the only thing that it's been talking about. It's using examples. It's just rephrasing it over and over again. This is what I have. So where do I go from here? Okay, so that's the thing. That's what I mean, build expectation. So now we have that concrete understanding, right? We have that concrete understanding. Whatever that's going to follow, we at least need to get to this point, because I mean they're probably going to, I mean, my guess, you can make several guesses here. What's usually going to happen is so we have our first paragraph here, and then after our first paragraph we can talk about how we got to this conclusion, right? How if we decide that we're going to state a study. If we state a study and then we come to that conclusion, the result is just going to be, basically, this is going to be a repetition of what's been said in the first paragraph, right? So that's what I can expect, okay? So that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting to use this information up to frame my understanding of the passage. It's going to be used up sometime, but only after I completely beat down this idea and move on to the next one am I going to frame a new understanding of the passage. So until then, this passage is all about this overlap, right? It's all about this overlap. This is all we're going to be talking about, okay? So what does it say? The theory that thought might involve simulating the activity patterns in our sensory and motor areas of the brain is called grounded or embodied cognition. Okay, that's good. So it defined it for us. So what is this first paragraph doing? This paragraph essentially is just explaining this, and that's it. There's nothing else, right? This passage, I mean, this paragraph is just, okay, hey, you guys don't know anything, so I'm going to start from ground zero. This is what embodied or grounded cognition means, right? It's an overlap between your motor and sensory part of the brain and your cognition part of the brain, right? That's it. Okay, so that's the only idea that we have. Okay, so let's go to the next part. Some of the evidence in favor of this view. Okay, so now what are we talking about? We're just talking about evidence. We're talking about evidence that supports this, right? Evidence that's going to support what we've just read. So worst case scenario, if I don't understand anything, that's fine. Because whatever I'm going to be talking about, it's all going to lead to this conclusion anyway, right? So they did this experiment, or they have this research, or whatever that comes here. This is the conclusion that I'm going to come to regardless, right? Okay, so let's take a look at the evidence. Well, the evidence is primarily experiments, right? So I guess, all right, so now we're going to use experiments, but again, we haven't used up our expectation here. I can still work with this, right? So whatever experiments that's about to follow, this is all there in order to say this, right? Okay, so let's take a look. That show that how you respond to something depends on otherwise irrelevant features of the sensory stimulus. Right, that's the same thing, right? That's the same thing that we've said. And of particular interest here, these seemingly irrelevant features often involve space. And then it says one classic study. Okay, so I guess we're going to be talking about several experiments, I feel like. And then the first one was a classic study by these people, right? You also want to box people. Whenever you see scientists, especially the leading scientists for the first time, you want to box them, okay? So Mike Tucker, Rob Ellis, blah, 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 subject to judge. Okay, so I'm not going to read this. I'm not going to read the process. So I'm just going to look at where the process ends, okay? So if you take a look at the very end of the passage, a detail we wouldn't normally consider to be important, but that was essential for what we're really getting at. Okay, so here, this is all process, right? I don't see the result anywhere. So you can just go ahead and skip this. I don't care, okay? So just skip it and go to the next part, okay? So secretly, Tucker and Ellis were not particularly interested in the blah, blah, blah. Okay, so we're still at process, right? We're still at process. Where does the result begin? So if while I'm looking, I find found, right? So now here's the result. So Whatever's going to be the result though, I know this is going to support what's been said, our key idea that's been mentioned here. It's the only thing that's going to potentially happen, right? It's not going to go against this. The author already told us that this is going to be evidence in favor of what we've read, right? So just go ahead. Found that when the handle on the frying pan was on the left, responses were indeed faster, right, whatever. Subjects also made fewer errors when the correct choice involved a match between the hand and the handle. So it's just saying like, okay, the hand and the handle, there was some kind of correlation, right? Hand and the handle. But I don't even know what that means because I didn't read the process. But still, it does not matter. Doesn't matter. Because the significance is just going to be this, right? When the objects were mirror reversed, blah, 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 or more accurate with more hand than the other. Okay, fine, right? So whatever. So starting from here, we describe the result. So this is for you to view later. Like, I mean, the significance is pretty obvious, right? Significance is that, you know, cognition and sensory motor parts, they're somehow interrelated. They use the same parts or whatever kind of thing, right? Okay, so let's go to the next part, and then I see another illustration. Okay, another illustration of a seemingly unnecessary connection between space and cognition comes from mental rotation experiments. Okay, so now I have a classic study, and then this one, like the result had to do with the hand and the handle kind of thing. And then now I have the mental rotation experiment. So what is this? In one early study, blah, 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 blah. All right, so it's just going to go here. So now I see the result, right? What's the result? They found that how long it took the subjects to make the judgment varied proportionally. Okay, so again, it's a correlation, right? So varied proportionally with the amount of rotation would have been needed. Okay, so how long it took, right? So the time is in a positive correlation with the amount of rotation that you would need, right? Okay, so time with amount of rotation. All right. All right, so let's go to the next part. And then it says, both of these experiments, although strictly behavioral, suggest, okay, so here we go, right? Significance. So here's our significance. What's the significance going to say? It's just going to say what we've read in the first paragraph, right? It's just talking about that grounded cognition, grounded or embodied cognition, right? So let's take a look. Mental reasoning can show signatures of real-world spatial constraints. Okay, so probably, you know, this is what it means when it comes to the motor thing, right? So this part you do want to underline and say, hey, this is the significance. This connects to the first idea that we have. And then it says, in the frying pan experiment, there is no reason for the side of the handle to affect responses. Subjects must merely indicate whether the frying pan is upright or not. But it does. Oh, so, you know, side of the handle. So I mean, I didn't read the experiment. I'm going to pretend like I didn't read the experiment. So I don't know what this is. But in the end, this is just going to support this significance. In the case of the mental rotation, no physical object to be actually turned, and yet the amount of time required varies with how far such an object would have needed to be turned if it did exist. Okay, you know, so they weren't actually talking about like a real object, right? So they just gave you a picture of an object, but still, in order for people to guess, they kind of imagined that thing to be real, and it was in proportion it was in proportion to how much you needed to turn that thing. I mean, I don't have any new information, but now I'm done. I used up all my expectation. What's going to follow after this? We already said this. I don't know. So now you need to pay attention and read. Okay? So they could, I mean, it could be anything, right? It could be anything after this. It could actually say something like, oh, why is this the case? Right? Why does this actually happen? Or they can say, hey, but actually this was actually reversed. Like there's a counter argument. There's a new study proving that this is untrue. But I'm done with the passage. This is the end, right? So like there's no reason that this passage should be hard at all. It's basically this one single idea, that there's an overlap between your motor senses, the motor parts of the brain and your cognition part of the brain, right? So when you're thinking, sometimes you activate the motor part. That's it. And then we have 2 experiments supporting that. So it shouldn't take you more than 2 minutes to read this, right? Okay, so let's take a look. Overall structure. Okay, overall structure is, all right, so the important thing is, you don't want to do this, okay? So we talked about this a lot. You see the word hypothesis, and then you feel the urge to go back to the passage. You guys remember talking about this? So you see the word hypothesis, you feel the urge, should you go back? Should you go back? No, right? So you shouldn't. You should just read on. I mean, you should do something like, okay, so do you mind not doing that? Okay, so I mean, you could tell yourself, I don't know if it's a hypothesis or not, but I'm going to find that out later. I'm just going to take a look at the latter part and see if that conforms to my understanding. A hypothesis is put forward. I mean, let's say that's true, right? Let's say that this thing is a hypothesis. In experiment testing, that hypothesis is outlined. Okay, yeah, we have an experiment, right? But I mean, I'm not so fond of this because I know for a fact that we talked about 2 experiments. So I'm not so happy about this. And then it says, an explanation for the findings. Yeah, okay, so we do get an explanation. But this one said in experiment, and I know for a fact that's untrue. Because I know that there were 2 studies, 2 experiments supporting this. So this is not true. What about B? A theory is described. Okay, fine. Let's say that's a theory, right? This thing that we read, let's say this is a theory. Studies. Okay, so this one apparently better than A, right? Because it's plural. Studies exploring that theory are recounted. Okay, so we did that, right? And the significance of the results is suggested. Yeah, we do. That's exactly what we did, right? So this one is fine. So I'm just going to leave this one, but I do want to check the other ones. Don't just pick this and move on, because there's that element of uncertainty. You don't know if you can say this is a theory still, right? But you don't want to go back to the passage, okay? So just say, okay, everything else seems fine. If this is a theory, then this could be an answer. What about C? A generalization is presented. Okay, fine. We can say this is a generalization. Let's say it's a generalization. 2 examples of the generalization are okay, they are not contrasted. This is not true. The 2 things, they were going along the same lines, right? They were just trying to support the same conclusion. So I don't want to say contrast. So not this one. D, a theory is introduced. Yes, this is something that we talk about in the beginning. Potential, no, I don't see potential criticism, right? So then your answer is B, right? Okay, so you do not. This is the most important thing, especially when you're, so I call these questions text structure questions. Text structure. When it's talking about the text structure, do not go back to the passage. If you need to go back to the passage, if you can't bear but go back to the passage, it means that you don't know how to read a passage yet. You need to practice that more, okay? When you were reading, you weren't reading in the right frame of mind. You were just looking at the words. You weren't looking at the structure. This is probably the only thing that you should be looking for when you're reading. This is something that you should always keep in mind. That's how we've been reading this thing, right? We talked about this and then we said, oh, okay, there's 2 experiments supporting that. So you should be able to do this, okay? Next one. Based on the passage, how would the authors most likely respond to another scientist's claim? Okay, so something that you need to know. If the passage asks you, how would the author likely respond? Should you use your creativity? No. Okay? So you should not use your own opinion. Do not infuse your own understanding into the passage. Just merely repeat what the author said. Okay? So our answer cannot be something that's not mentioned. It needs to be within the confines of the passage. So whatever we distilled out of the passage needs to be one of the answer choices. Okay? So it cannot depart from that. You can't. You can't say, hey, oh, this guy, I think like he's going to accept another viable alternative. This guy seems like that kind of No, you can't do that. You can't guess. You can only repeat like a parrot what's been said. Okay, that's it, right? So the author is going to say, okay, so but what's the topic? Let's take a look at the topic. Another scientist claimed that the theory of embodied cognition, yeah, this is the idea that we've been talking about, cannot account for thoughts regarding abstract concepts such as peace and honesty. Well, okay. So when you were reading the passage, okay, this one, does it have a line reference? Okay, no. Like, okay, fine. For this one, you should know the answer right away. Okay, so if you do not know the answer for this right away, it means that when you're reading, you're not looking for qualifiers. Okay? If you can't think of, if an answer doesn't come to your mind right away, you're not looking for qualifiers. Okay? What do I mean qualifiers? Qualifiers are words like some, or like sometimes, right? Or most. You know what I'm saying, right? So was he talking about all of the cases? Was he talking about some of the cases, or that kind of thing? This is what it's overtly asking you for. Okay? So if you go back to the first part, okay? So I'm not saying you need to go back, but I just wanted to show you guys, okay? So if you go back to the first part, where is this? So here. So it's this part. At least in parts. Right? So this is the part that you should have annotated, okay? I did not annotate this on purpose, okay? Because I wanted you guys, I mean, if I just underline this and say, oh, this is important, this might be tested, you guys would have known that answer choice right away. But if you cannot rephrase an answer for that question that we've just been doing, it means you're not looking for qualifiers. You're not checking for some important things. Another important thing besides qualifiers that you need to check all the time, are the scientists sure? Or not? So you need to look at how certain they are. Was it just their guess? Or is that proven for sure? You also need to look for this, the scientist's prior knowledge. Okay? So did the scientist already know about this even before the experiment? Was this something that was proven a long time before? Or was this proven via this experiment? Is this what they did not expect but they found out during this experiment? So those kinds of information you also need to look for when you're reading. Okay? So this part depends here. So he's not saying like there's like a complete overlap. He's saying in some cases, right? In some cases there are overlaps. So what if someone comes up to him and says, hey, what about like ideas like peace and honesty? What is he going to say? Yeah, I just said they apply to some parts, right? It's not like all of them, right? That's what he's going to say. So, okay, so by arguing that the scientist has not fully considered the mechanics of the theory, Well, no, no. I mean, this, hey, you haven't thought about all the mechanics that I talked about. No, no, okay? So he's going to say, yeah, you're right, right? Because that's what it said in the passage too, right? He didn't say it accounts for all the ideas, especially when it comes to abstract concepts. Probably these are the ones here. These are the ones not overlapping, right? So he's probably going to concede here. Concede that the theory of embodied cognition may not account for all. So he's saying not all here, right? It's a negation of all. So that's what we need here, okay? So who got this question wrong? Okay, so, okay. So both of you, if you got it wrong, you don't want to fall into the trap of starting to think. Okay, if you couldn't think about, if you couldn't come up with an answer right after reading the question stem, it means that you need to pay more close attention to these three things when you're reading. Okay. Okay, so this is just asking us for the definition of embodied cognition, and that should be pretty easy because that's the only idea that we know about, right? So embodied cognition, right? It's talking about this, right? Embodied cognition. So it's an overlap. So I mean, some of the motor parts of your brain, they're used when you're thinking and stuff. Okay, so emerges from reactions to certain. Okay, well, we never talked about this. You should come to the realization that this is a completely irrelevant idea. If you can't say that this is an irrelevant idea, again, you do not know what this passage is about. You don't have that 100% certainty. Okay. B says can be used to improve. Okay. Improve is also a completely irrelevant idea. We never talked about improving anything. That was not, it's just not mentioned. I have nothing else to say except the fact that it was not mentioned in the passage, right? C, may involve activation of signals that also control the body. So this is the one that talks about motor, right? Yeah. D says demands conscious mental effort. Okay, so did we talk about conscious effort and like unconscious effort? No. This is also an irrelevant idea. So C would be the right answer. Okay. So who got this question wrong? Okay, good. So I mean this one. All right. So let's take a look. Let's take a look at interest. So when it comes to line references, do you guys remember how to do line reference questions? I mean, not line reference, words and context questions. Yeah. Wait, how do you do it?
Plug in each.
Oh, you plug in each. Yes, that's very good, right? So you plug it in and it needs to work. It needs to work like a charm, like considering all the prepositions and whatever. You can't use transitive verbs for intransitive verbs kind of thing, right? So let's take a look. So line 20. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go back, okay? So particular and of particular interest here. Okay. These seemingly irrelevant features often involve space. Okay, so what is this? Particular interest meaning, hey, we're just interested in this, right? So that it's that interest, right? So what was of interest to them? I mean, this one is pretty easy. It's importance, right? That's why, I mean, this is what they were trying to find, right? I mean, it's just interest at the very basic level, right? Okay, so let's take a look at 15. When the author refers to certain studies as classic, okay, so this one is kind of similar to a purpose question. So now you're not going to find an answer in the passage. So this, what I'm saying is, it's not a rephrase question. So we're not trying to rephrase what the author's been what the author's been saying. We need to think about the author's purpose and some conventional expressions, right? So why would the author say something is classic? I mean, this is a classic study, meaning like it's, what does it mean? Classic study.
Long established rule regarding
Hey, when you guys talk about movies and stuff, right? Yeah, that's a classic. You guys heard that? Yeah, when you talk about like music albums or like books, yeah, all the books that you guys read in school are classics, right? What does it mean it's a classic? Long established and well regarded. Yeah, I mean that's right. That's it actually. There's no I could explain it, but there's no better way to put it than this, right? That's what a classic is. Something that withstood the test of time, right? It's just like it was very. It doesn't need. For it to be a classic, it doesn't need to be influential during its time or whatever, but it's just that everybody looks at that and says, oh, that's really something, pretty noteworthy, right? It's like serves as a great precedent, or it's like an example of a really well-made film during the 70s, or something like that, right? So that's what a classic is, right? So it's talking about D. And you're not going to find the answer in the passage. This is not a rephrasing question, right? Based on the passage, which statement regarding these subjects in Tucker and Ellis's experiment can most reasonably be inferred? Okay, so now we're in trouble. Why? Because if you take a look at the answer choices, it's all talking about the processes, right? So, we're talking about the test subjects, right? We're talking about the test subjects. I have no idea. Because I didn't read them. Remember? I didn't read all the process. But here's the time to go back, okay? So now that they've asked you this question, now you can go back. But sometimes they don't. You can get away with not reading the process. But here, I guess you need to go back. But subjects. So it's talking about subjects in these two people's experiments. So what I'm going to do, I want to go to this question first, and I want to ask myself, hey, do I have subjects? Like by subjects, I mean, is the word physically present, or does it also talk about subjects? It needs to be physically there, right? You can't look for an inference or whatever, right? Don't look for inferences when it comes to line reference questions. When it comes to paired questions, that's what you do, right? You find a key word, you find a key phrase that you're going to look for in the line reference, in this case, which is the subjects. So you just go to line 21 to 24, and then you ask yourself, hey, is this going to be the process or whatever? Okay, so let's go to line 21. Okay, so this might be a tedious process, but you guys need to know this, okay? So 21 to 24, are the subjects mentioned here? Are the subjects mentioned? Yes. So this could potentially be an answer. So what am I going to do? So what do we know about the subjects? Well, I know that they've been asked to judge whether the items were upside down or right side up, right? So that's what you should put next to A. So next to answer choice A, you should take like a small note saying, okay, so here, if the answer choice is A, they were asked to judge, right? Judge upside down or right side up. Right? So this is answer choice A. What about B? What's the line reference for B? 24, 26. The stimuli, okay, we don't have any, we do not discuss the subjects here. So I'm going to eliminate B. What about C? 26, 28. Thanks. So subjects were to indicate their choice by pressing a designated button. One button for upright and other for upside down. Okay, so the subjects used a button, right? They used a button and it was either going to be A or B, right? Upside down or right side up, right? So they were determining that. What about D? Sorry, last one. 34? 34 to 38? Okay, so 34 to 38. Let's take a look at 34 to 38. Tucker and Ellis were not particularly interested, blah, blah, blah. But whether the subjects, okay, it did show up, right? Subjects would respond faster when they had to press the button with the hand on the same side as the handle of this object in the polygraph. Oh, okay. So that's what Tucker and Ellis were suspecting something, right? They were suspecting whether they would respond faster when it's the same side, when the handle is on the same side as their hands, right? So this was their question. So now that I have this, I can go to this question, right? Okay, so let's take a look at A. So it says they were unaware. Okay, so fine. Actually, you know, I kind of messed up here then, because I saw that word secretly, right? When I was reading D, it said secretly. So I mean, they were secretly trying to do this, right? So I mean, but I still remember reading that line, so I can make that connection. So I'm gonna say, oh, okay, this could actually be paired with D, right? The line reference one. What about B? They had been carefully selected based on their. No, this is irrelevant. I don't remember seeing anything like this. They frequently used. No, I don't know anything about whether they were used to using this or whatever. They had unusually well-developed. Really? Come on. Okay, they're totally irrelevant. So now I'm gonna go with D, and then A, and for the line reference, I'm gonna go with D, right? Because the secretly part substantiates the unaware part. So that's why I tell you guys not to necessarily read the process, because even if you do read the process, you still need to go back in the line reference question. Chances are you need to check yourself, right? Like even if you're like 90% sure, just to be sure, you should check those kinds of things. So if you're going to come back anyway, just skip the process and focus on the big picture when you're reading it for the first time, right? So anyway, what about 18? So 18 is also a line reference question, okay? So let's do a similar thing. Could the likelihood that most participants in Tucker and Ellis' study write with their right hands be used as an effective challenge to their conclusions? Okay. Oh, okay, so this question is talking about handedness, right? So they write with their right hands, meaning they're right-handed, right? So could this be a challenge? I have no idea how I'm going to answer this question, but good thing that I have a line reference question. So what am I going to do? I'm going to keep this in mind, right? So this is our key phrase. Our key phrase is the fact that they write with right hand. Is this going to be an effective challenge? Can this potentially hurt their argument? That's what it's asking. Okay, so let's take a look. Let's take a look. So for question 19, I want to start looking from D. Why? Why do you think I want to start looking from D for this answer, for this question? Okay, so remember this question? Remember the previous question? Like I read up till here and this was all processed. Do you remember that? So I'm pretty sure that the result and significance is going to be sometime after 38, right? So I don't want to waste any time starting from the process bit. I actually, I know I'm still taking a chance. I'm not saying like D or C is the answer, but I'm saying it's better to look for them first. right? You could potentially hit jackpot just in like C or D, right? So let's take a look at 47. So let's go back to 47, and then it says, when the objects were mirror reversed, the response pattern reversed as well, indicating it was not simply a matter of being faster or more accurate it says it was not simply a matter of handedness. Yeah, so this is our answer, right? So I'm just going to choose this first, right? I'm just going to choose D for the line reference question, and then I'm going to say C or D here. So I'm going to say it's not an effective challenge. Why? Because they reversed it and tried it again, right? They reversed it. Because the research study design has successfully ruled out the possibility. Yeah, this is what they did. So this is something that happens in recent tests pretty often. Putting down the potential counter-argument. Do you guys remember that in science passages? Putting down the potential counter-argument. So this is something, of the passages that we've read, so we've read some passages in the past, okay, so I don't know if you guys remember this from Spoon-Fed, but there was this passage where they gave fishing rods to kids. You guys remember this? And then they said, hey, you should wind that. And this was actually about like social facilitation, right? If you have audience watching, do you do it faster or slower? Do you perform better in the presence of audience or not, right? But anyway, they give kids fishing rods. Like, I don't know, it was like 40 kids, and then you give them fishing rods. And then it mentions something like this. None of the kids, I'm paraphrasing by the way, had prior experience with fishing rods. This rules out a potential counter-argument, right? Because what can they say? Hey, you don't, I mean, there's going to be that variability. If the kids are kids who are real, if some kids are really good at fishing and some kids are not good at fishing, it's going to be different, right? That could be a potential counter-argument. Do you guys remember? Yeah. So this is ruling out a potential counter-argument. And when you see that in the passage, you should be able to identify that, right? And another example that I want to talk about, like that very first passage that we read, that very first science passage that we read, it was about how farming spread, right? You guys remember that? How farming spread. So they looked at the caves, right? They looked at the caves, and then they found 170 skeletons. Right? That's what they said, right? But what it said, the team ensured that each individual was sampled only once. I mean, we didn't get a question on this, but there was this. Why would they bother mentioning the fact that they ensured that each individual was sampled only once? Because some person might have came along and said, hey, I mean, isn't this actually 17 people, but you mistakenly sampled them 10 times each, and you made the conclusion that it's 170 skeletons? Someone could have said that. So he says, hey, we made sure we sampled them only once. That's putting down a potential counter-argument. I'm telling you guys this because we have more of these questions nowadays. Like if you look at the test from 2019 and 2020, there's a lot of these. This test is from 2020. So yeah, that's okay. Okay, so this is just looking at the table. Does it ask you to look at the passage? Do we need to look at the passage, or do we just need to look at the table? The table only. Okay, so when you're looking at the table only, make sure not to infuse your own understanding of the passage into this information, right? So don't say, for example, like some of the answer choices, I mean, they give you a graph, right? They give you a graph blah, blah, blah. They give you some kind of graph, and then they say, hey, what can you infer from this graph? And then one of the answers can say, hey, this was the result of something. Can't say something like that. They can say, or they say, hey, this is the most effective method. You can't say that. All we have is a bunch of numbers. It's the only thing that we can say, right? I feel like this question is pretty easy, so I'm not gonna go over it. Which one did you guys both get this right? Which one did you choose?
For
20.
20.
So let's take a look at D. Subjects responded fastest. Okay, fastest when presented with objects with handles on the same side as their response hand for both object handle orientations. Okay, so it needs to be fastest, and it's on when it's on the same side. Okay, so same side. Wait. Object for both object handle orientations. Okay, so I take a look at here. Take a look at here. Yeah, respond time was fast, right? Compared to these. Yeah, so that's the right answer, right? 21. How would an advocate of the theory of embodied cognition most likely explain the results presented in the table? So now this is the passage plus table question, right? So you also need to bring your understanding of the passage. So what do we know about embodied cognition? So, I mean, when it comes to the embodied cognition, I know we didn't read much of the, what is that? We didn't read much of the process and whatever, but I know that it was talking about something like this, right? So, we're talking about like theoretical things. Like they didn't actually have like a fry pan in front of them or whatever. It was like they just needed to choose or whatever, right? It's not they were like physically moving it or whatever, but anyway, the location of the handle, it was in correlation with the hand pressing the button or whatever, right? So from that they deduced that there is a correlation here, right? So I mean, let's take a look. So A said, what did you guys choose for this one? A says, when the response hand is on the same side as the object handle, the objects in the photographs are easier to recognize. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so this one is something that the advocate would bring in, right? And also it conforms to what's in the passage, what's in the table, right? In the table, if it's on the same side, you respond faster, right? So it's probably easier to recognize. So A is A the right answer? More deliberately. C, opposite, the brain must take longer to adjust. Is A correct? Did you guys get it right? Is that how you treat all your papers? You just like squeeze it into your bag? Okay. Do you guys get that right? Okay. Why do you think that is the case? Okay, so I mean, think about it. Well, it's weird. Did you guys cooperate? Think about this. The answer is C, right? Okay. So, this is something, okay, so easier to recognize. It's not actually about difficulty in terms of recognizing it. It's just that the brain's, it's about the brain's motor and sensory input, right? It's that part of the brain. So if it's on the opposite part, the brain must take longer. So that's why there's a difference in the difference in time, right? I got confused for a sec because, I thought you guys. It's kind of weird that you guys both chose A. But like the response time, like it's like milliseconds, right? It's like really small. It's not necessarily, so the time difference is not necessarily because it's easier to recognize or more difficult to recognize. It's just that the brain does the processing much faster because it's the motor skills involved, right? It's the motor part of the brain involved. So that's why C, it's just taking longer, right? It just takes longer. Good? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna take a break, and then when we come back, we'll look at the history passage from the test, okay? Huh?
I guess on every single question.
Because you didn't have time?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for being honest, I guess. How was this passage? Was it hard or?
It wasn't extremely hard.
Okay. Well, did you get a chance to do it again? To try it again?
Yeah, I actually.
Huh?
Yeah, I read through it.
Okay, you read through it. Did you try the questions again?
Yeah, actually, my guessing method was more accurate than I thought.
What was your guessing method?
Oh. A, B, C, D, A, B, C.
What?
A, B, C, D, A, B, C.
Don't, like literally you guessed on every single question?
Yeah.
Why would you do A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D? You should just go with one answer choice then.
No.
That's like, why would,
No, I hit jackpot this
no,
time.
that's, okay. So 10 questions, so how many did you get right then?
5.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay, so your score is bogus then. Your score is supposed to be like 30 points lower then. You shouldn't guess that way. I mean, you got lucky. Okay. It's not a dual passage, it's a single passage, right? Because the passage is from this history of the rise, progress, and termination of the American Revolution. Okay, so you guys know what the American Revolution is. It's the war against Britain, right? So the Americans trying to gain independence, right? So it's going to be about that. And then Warren addresses the time period directly following the American Revolution. Okay, fine. So this is what we're going to be talking about. We're not talking about the American Revolution itself, right? What are we talking about? The time after the American Revolution. So that's all we know. I have no idea what to expect from this, aside from the fact that it's going to be discussing the time period after the American Revolution. So let's take a look. So this is connection, by the way, right? So though the connection was now dissolved. Okay, so what connection is it talking about? I'm not so sure yet, okay? And the Gordian knots of union between Great Britain and America cut in asunder. Oh, okay. So it's talking about the connection between Great Britain and America, right? So he's saying, yeah, they're not related to each other anymore, right? They gained independence. We know that, right? They gained independence. Though the independence of the United States was, by the treaty, clearly established on the broad basis of liberty, yet, okay, so this is what we're trying to say, right? So it's trying to say this. Though independent, and though they had that liberty, the Americans felt themselves in such a state of infancy. Okay, so that's what we're trying to say. So America was independent and they had their liberty, but still they were like an infant. So I want to treat this as some kind of analogy. Okay? I don't want to make any guesses. When it comes to infancy, look, what does it mean to be an infant? Does it mean, well, I mean, you can probably guess and it could be a pretty accurate guess in this case because we don't have much room for interpretation when it says state of infancy, but you always want to be sure, okay? You want to have another anchor point. You want to use another word as a reference point to pinpoint the definition of what it means to be in a state of infancy. So that as a child just learning to walk, they were afraid of their own movements. Oh, this is what they're trying to say. So they're like a baby. They're a baby country, right? Baby country, they don't know what they're doing, right? And they're kind of worried. They're afraid, right? So I'm just going to say this. State of infancy, they're afraid of their own movements. Okay, so what kind of movements are we talking about? Are we talking about in terms of like their society, or are we talking about their movements in terms of their political structure? I don't know, right? It could be anything, right? It could be political, social, economic, whatever, right? So I want to find that out. What do you mean by they're unsure of they're afraid of their own movements? I want to find that out in the next part. Their debts were unpaid. Okay, so first of all, monetary, right? So they didn't pay their debts. Their government's unsettled, political. Oh, okay, so it's talking about all across the board. All across the board, their movement, they were afraid of their movements, right? And the people out of breath by their long struggle for the freedom, right? So the people kind of worn out, the government's unsettled, so the political instability and the monetary problems. A lot of problems all over the board, like all across the board, and independence of their country. They were become poor from the loss of trade. Okay, so it's elaborating on this. Elaborating on them afraid of their own movements, and this is political, this is social, this is economical, it's everything, right? So all across the board they were having difficulties. The neglect of their usual occupations and the drains from every quarter for the support of a long and expensive war, right? Okay, so this is the first idea mentioned in the passage, state of infancy, right? State of infancy, and what do I mean by infancy? Well, like some kind of instability, right? Some kind of instability in terms of political, social, and economical, like everything, right? They sucked at everything, right? So let's go to the next part. From the versatility, okay, so when it says versatility, it's not the versatility that we talk about nowadays. So when we say versatility nowadays, what does it mean? Like versatile person, you can do a lot of things, right? And that's not the versatility we're talking about. Usually when it says versatility, especially when it's talking about like political stuff, it's talking about the unpredictability, the variability, right? That kind of thing. From the versatility of human affairs, right? So you don't know what's going to happen when it comes to human affairs, right? You don't know. Like there's that element of unpredictability. There's that, what is that? The variability, that kind of thing, right? And the encroaching spirit of man, it was yet uncertain when and how the states would be tranquilized. Huh. What does it mean the states would be tranquilized? So we didn't know when the states would be tranquilized and the union consolidated. Oh, so this is how I should look at it. So usually when it comes to American history, when you're talking about the union, the federal government, that's in opposition to the states, right? So some people say, hey, the states should have more power. Other people say, hey, the unions should have more power, right? So when I say the states would be tranquilized, I mean the states would be in check. The power of the states would be in check. That's what I mean when I say this. Because it says union consolidated, right? Under wise, energetic, and free modes of government, or whether such, if established, would be administered agreeable to laws founded on the beautiful theory of republicanism. Okay, so republicanism, you should just treat this as democracy, right? That's how that's how you should think, right? Republicanism, we talked about this. It's what is republicanism? You vote for representatives, and the elected representatives rule the country, right? That's what republicanism is. When they say republicanism, usually in history passages, republicanism is always used in a positive connotation, right? They're talking about republicanism as like it's the new thing back then. It's the new thing. It's the ideal form of government, right? As opposed to what? Like a monarchy or dictatorship like in Europe, right? So this is the ideal, right? We were uncertain about how the union is going to be consolidated, meaning how the union is going to be strengthened, right? since it's a big country and whatever. And they were also unsure if the laws are going to be agreeable, right? So there's that element of uncertainty. So the uncertainty comes to the agreeableness of the laws, union's consolidation. Consolidation would mean coming together and being strengthened, right? Depicted in the closets of philosophers and idolized in the imagination of most of the inhabitants of America, right? Okay, so this theory of republicanism, it's depicted here in a very ideal way, right? It's ideal as in, it might seem a little bit naive even, right? So they didn't try this, they never tried this, so they were uncertain if this thing is actually gonna work, right? They're the first government to ever try this in modern history, right? So, you know, they're just unsure. That's what he's trying to say here. America's like, oh, okay, we don't know how we're gonna go about this. We don't know if this is actually gonna work. We don't know if this form of government, it's actually gonna work, that kind of thing. Okay, so it's talking about like, you know, so, I mean, in essence, it's kind of similar, like point 1 and 2, right? America's just become a new country. They have a lot of problems. They have a lot of uncertainties. That's it, right? Okay, so let's go to the third paragraph. It is indeed true. Okay, so it is, whenever it says like, oh, it is true, of course, obviously, right? It's usually a concession, right? So it's admitting to a point, admitting to a shortcoming or admitting to the opponent's point of view. Right? It is indeed true that from a general attention to early education, the people of the United States were better informed. Okay, so he says, yeah, okay, yeah, I talked about all the shortcomings, but yeah, it's sure, I understand that they were better informed, right? Better informed meaning what? Like they learned more, they had more knowledge, I guess, and that's in many branches of literature. Oh, okay, that's what he's trying to say, right? So yeah. In many branches of literature, is that what, like, am I talking about like Shakespeare and stuff? Okay, so when it says literature, it's not necessarily the literature that you guys think of, okay? So especially when it comes to like science, they also use the word literature. What's literature? You know, it's just something that's been written. So if I say literature in like a science passage, what would that be? You know, like published theories and stuff, right? Some stuff written in science journals, you know, previous scientists contemplating on matters, that kind of thing, right? In this case, what would it be? It would be like political philosophy, that kind of thing, right? So these people, right? The Americans, they knew a lot of stuff, right? They knew their philosophy. They knew how republicanism should work, ideally, you know, and that kind of thing. Then the common classes of men in most other countries. Okay, so this is a comparison, right? Comparison between people of the United States versus other countries, right? So this is kind of like a concession. Let's just say this is a concession, right? So the concession is U.S. better informed. And yeah, this is a comparison, right? People in the United States, they were better informed. But many of them had but a superficial knowledge of mankind. Okay, so that's the thing. So yeah, they were better informed, but, right? The important thing here is it was only a superficial knowledge. As opposed to what? As opposed to in-depth knowledge, right? So they only had like a cursory understanding, like a very superficial understanding. They don't have any deep insights with regards to it. They were about what? About mankind. Okay, so not necessarily about philosophy, not necessarily about politics, but about man. Okay, about people. They don't know about people. So this is where they were lacking. They don't know how men think and operate. That's what it's trying to say. They were ignorant of the intrigues of courts. Okay, so again, so this is something different, right? Intrigues of courts. What does it mean, intrigues? Well, by court, you guys know what it is. Law, right? So intrigues of courts, meaning, you guys know that the United States justice system, it works primarily based on precedents, as opposed to like Korea or France's system. They have written laws. Korea has written laws. But the United States, they don't have written laws. They have statutes, but they don't have laws. It's based on precedent. So in their infancy, what would have been like? Like, they're like, oh yeah, we don't know how to go about this, right? So they don't know how to deal with all the nuances when it comes to laws, that kind of thing, right? And though convinced of the necessity of government, did not fully understand its nature or origin. Oh, okay. So they sucked at everything. So I just thought it was going to be mankind, but they sucked at everything. So they sucked at understanding man, they sucked at understanding laws, they sucked at understanding government, right? They had generally supposed there was little to do but to shake off the yoke of foreign domination and annihilate the name of Kino. Okay, so they just wanted to shake off foreign domination. That's all they were thinking, right? So they just wanted to gain independence from Great Britain. That's pretty much all they wanted. They really haven't thought about all these nuances, right? Like law, government, people. They didn't give it much thought. They only had a superficial knowledge, right? So, I mean, it's still kind of going along the same lines, right? So I do have some more information, but I don't see like a particular insight that stands out or anything just yet. Okay, so these passages are even harder though. Like if you don't have a point that sticks out, if you feel like it's all the same thing, which it might feel like, that's even harder when you're solving the questions, because I mean, doesn't it all go along the same line? It means you need to delineate each point even better. Okay. Anyway, okay, so let's take a look. They were not generally sensible that most established modes of strong government are usually the consequences. Oh, okay. They were not sensible that established modes of strong governments are usually, okay, so this is the qualifier that I was talking about. It's not always, right? It's usually. Strong modes of government are usually what? Consequences. So this is a cause and effect, right? So what's the cause? Fraud or violence being the cause. Fraud or violence causes a strong government, usually. That's what he's trying to say, right? So he's saying Americans did not recognize this. Americans did not recognize that usually fraud or violence causes a strong government, right? So they're like, what's the picture that this guy's painting? Americans are so naive, right? They just thought they just wanted to shake off this foreign domination. They wanted to make their own country. But now that they've had, they're lost. They're in a state of infancy. That's what he's trying to say, right? Against the systems of democratic theorists, right? Okay, so this is an opposing idea, right? They were not sensible that from age to age the people are flattered, deceived, or threatened until the hood-winked multitudes set their own seals to a renunciation of their privileges. Oh, okay. So people were usually deceived or threatened until they gave up their privileges. So, Americans did not know this, right? Americans neglected this, right? Fraud and violence leads to strong government, and then usually you deceive people, right? You deceive people and you threaten people, and then they give up their privilege, right? So usually this is how you should go about business, right? When you're trying to make a government, you should deceive people. You should threaten people. But Americans did not recognize this. That's the point that he's trying to make here, right? And with their own hands, rivet the chains of servitude on their posterity. Posterity means what? What does posterity mean? Wait, are you an American citizen?
Yeah.
Where did you go to elementary school in the States?
Yeah.
Did you memorize the preamble to the Constitution?
We the people
Yeah. And then?
of the United States of America.
Okay. Well, actually, you're wrong already, but go ahead.
No, I don't know.
We the people, in order to form a more perfect union, right? Form a more, we talked about all of that, right? Form a union. Form a more perfect union, establish justice and promote tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, our descendants. Okay? Do ordain and establish this Constitution of the United States of America. That's the preamble, right? It helps if, I mean, weren't you required to memorize it in school?
Wait, when did they teach that?
I don't know. This was like, I don't know, like 3rd or 4th grade or something like that. Huh?
I left them after this.
Oh yeah. Well. Do you know the Pledge of Allegiance then?
I used to.
You're not American. What? You're not American. Where did you live?
Connecticut.
Connecticut? Where in Connecticut?
Weathersfield.
Where's that?
That's in Hartford.
Oh, near Hartford?
Yeah.
Do you remember a lot? Were you born there?
No, I was born in Rochester.
What? Rochester?
Yeah.
Did your dad go to school around there or something?
No, he worked for a GM.
Oh,
So he
okay.
was,
So,
like, there for
oh, okay. So he worked there, and then, do you have a brother or sister?
2 sisters.
Older than you, right?
Yeah.
Okay. A lot older than you?
Yeah.
How old is your oldest sister? Probably. Probably.
Like
Don't break the chair.
29 or 30.
29 or 30, really? What do you know what year she was born in?
1990.
1990?
Yeah.
So that's, I mean, 30 or 31. No, not 31. 29 or 30.
Yeah.
Do I look older than her or younger than her?
Wait.
What?
Are you implying that you're
Huh?
around that age?
No. I'm just asking. I'm not saying anything. I'm just asking.
I guess maybe
Maybe what?
around.
Around? Yeah, but older. That's not my question. Older or older or younger?
About the same age.
About the same. So you think I was born in 1990? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay, fine. So posterity, descendants, right? Okay. So they were threatened and deceived. To give up their privileges, and then they gave that chain to their posterity, right? They're like, hey, here you go. You can also give up your privileges like me, right? So that kind of thing. So right now we're talking about all the things that that make a strong government, that make people give up their liberty. The Americans did not know of these. That's what we're talking about. They were totally fearless of the intrigues, of the ambition of their. Okay, so when it says ambition, it's not the ambition that you usually think about. when in history passages. In older context, you should just say it's a want, right? Want, ambition, want or goal. So it's similar but a little bit different. Okay, so it's not that like when we talk about ambition, we talk about like being like ambitious and that kind of thing, right? So it's not that, it's just want or goal. So, or the ambition of their own countrymen. Okay, so they intrigues or they were fearless of the intrigues, and they were also fearless of the ambitions of their own countrymen. So they neglected the fact that some people would want to subvert the government or something like that. That's what it's implying, which might in time render fruitless the expense of their blood and their treasures, right? So they're just too naive, right? So the Americans are too naive. They don't know about man. They don't know about government. They don't know about laws. They don't know about their own people's wants. Like some people, they might want to subvert the government. They want to like change the government or that kind of thing, but they didn't actually think about that. These they had freely lavished to secure their equality of conditions. So this was all the Americans were thinking about. They just wanted equality, right? They just wanted equality, and they lavished all of these, right? Their easy modes of subsistence and their exemption from public burdens, right? So they did not want the public burdens. They wanted, what does it mean, subsistence? It means just 먹고 사는 거, right? Just surviving, right? Just having your food, like having your daily food to eat and having a place to live, like the subsistence, right? So they were only concerned about equality, subsistence, and they didn't want any public burdens, right? Those were Americans, that's saying. Beyond the necessary demands for the support of a free and equal government, right? Okay, so they only wanted a free and equal government, but they didn't want to sacrifice more than that. They didn't want to take more burden than that, right? But it was not long before they were awakened to new energies by convulsions both home and abroad. Oh, okay, so now we're going to be talking about something, I guess. So they were really naive. They didn't know all of these, but they were awakened. I don't know exactly what it means, awakened by the convulsions. We'll find out in the next paragraph. So let's take a look here. New created exigencies. What's an exigency? Okay, a pretty low frequency word, but it helps if you know. It just means difficulties, like hardships, right? So new difficulties. That's what it means. Okay? So new difficulties or more splendid modes of government that might hereafter be adopted had not yet come within the reach of their calculations. So did they calculate this? No. They did not. They were not able to calculate the difficulties that were going to come. They did not calculate the modes of government that were going to come. So they did not think about the situations that would come in the future, right? They did not predict any of this. That's what they're saying. Right? So they didn't really know. Of these, few had yet formed any adequate ideas, and fewer indeed were sensible. Okay, so we did not have adequate ideas. They were not sensible that though the name of liberty delights the ear and trickles the fond pride of man, it is a jewel much oftener the plaything of his imagination. So liberty, it's delightful, right? Liberty sounds delightful, but what's the reality? It's something like a plaything of your imagination. It's not something that's real, is what this guy's trying to say. Then a possession of real stability. Okay, so it's not a possession of real stability. It's something of an imagination, right? So Americans did not recognize that liberty, right? They did not think about their situation. They just thought liberty is like a real thing, which in fact is not, according to this guy. This is something of an imagination, but they did not recognize that this is something so esoteric and something so abstract that is hard to be acquired, right? It may be acquired today in all the triumph of independent feelings, but perhaps tomorrow the world may be convinced that mankind know not how to make a proper use of the prize being liberty, right? So, yeah, today you might have it, but I'm not sure about tomorrow. People might change, right? Generally bartered in a short time as a useless bauble to the first officious master that will take the burden from the mind by laying another on the shoulders of tenfold weight, right? Okay, so, they might trade it off later on, right? You don't know what's going to happen, okay? And then it says, this is the usual course of human conduct. What? Are we talking about Americans anymore? Are we talking about Americans? So that's what you want to think about, okay? So this is something that history passages do pretty often. It's like a pretty broad generalization. Are we talking about Americans? This is the usual course of human conduct. No, it's just talking about like everything in general when it comes to humans, right? So usually, this is what he says, this is usually what happens to humans, right? However painful the reflection may be to the patriot in retirement and to the philosopher absorbed in theoretical disquisitions of human liberty or the portion of natural and political freedom to which man has a claim, right? The reflection might be painful to the patriot, right? And it might be painful to the philosopher. It might be painful to man, right? But this is what usually happens. Hey, this might be a little bit painful to hear, you patriots, you philosophers, you men, but, this is usually what happens. What is this? Well, people not being able to look past today, right? You don't know what's about to come, right? That's what he's been talking about the whole time, right? America, like they were just very naive. They're just looking at what's right in front of them. They just wanted that liberty. They just wanted to get rid of that burden. But now that they did, they're facing a lot of different problems. That's what he's saying. The game of deception is played over and over to mislead the judgment of men. Okay, so there's deception, which is going to affect judgments and work on their enthusiasm until by their own consent, hereditary crowns and distinctions are fixed and some sign of royal descent is entailed upon them forever. So he's saying it's inevitable that you're going to get this someday. Like right now you have liberty, but you don't know. You like later on there's going to be deception. Later on there's going to be deception until this happens, right? Again, you're going to get like someone in power, right? So so he's talking about human conduct in general, right? You can't really look past what's right in front of you, right? And usually what happens is you get like a hereditary crown again. You're under a monarch again. Like they deceive you. Thus, by habit, they are ready to believe that mankind in general are incapable of the enjoyment of that liberty, which nature seems to prescribe, right? So they are like, people are ready to believe that you don't deserve that liberty, which nature seems to prescribe, and that the mass of the people have not the capacity nor the right to choose their own masters. So usually people are persuaded, hey, you don't deserve that liberty. Let me rule you. People are persuaded. That's usual course of human conduct. He's not saying it's right. He's not saying it's wrong, right? He's just explaining, hey, this is the way it goes, right? Okay. Any questions on this passage? Okay, so before we forget anything, let's just jump right into the shift focus question, okay? So when you have a focus shift question, what you're going to do, you're not going to go back to the passage, right? This is also a text structure question, right? Text structure, okay? Important thing about text structure, you should be able to answer the text structure question without going back to the passage. If you can't do that, okay, if you can't solve the text structure questions, it means that you're not understanding the passage in a right way, okay? You're just looking at the words. You don't have the right frame of mind. So that's what you need to practice. Okay, well, anyway, but I don't have any kind of expectation. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying like you should know what the shift is right from the get-go. I'm saying if you read the right answer, you should be like, oh yeah, this is what happened. So let's take a look. An analysis of the difficulties facing Americans. So yeah, we did talk about a lot of difficulties here, right? This is the difficulties that America is facing, right? To a reflection on the repercussions of a human character. Oh, that human characteristic, yeah. At the very end, they talked about that human characteristic, right? This is usually what happens when it comes to human conduct, right? They give up their liberty, right? It's pretty good. I don't know what to deny here. B says a warning about. Okay, well, he's not. Okay, fine. Well, it's not a warning, but let's just say it's a warning. Okay, fine. He talked about the instabilities and whatever, so let's just say that it is a warning. To a critique of Great Britain's government, really? Right? So this is completely irrelevant. C says a description of okay, education system? Come on. Recollection of the end of the war. I don't know. I mean, it's just not mentioned, right? We didn't talk about the end of the war, but let's just say that it did, right? Okay, so if you're confused for whatever reason, let's just say that this is true. What about this one? To a recommendation that Americans implement a democratic system. Hey, you guys should implement a democratic system. Did we ever say that? No, right? He never told people what to do. He was just explaining how things usually happen. So A. Right? The image of the child just learning to walk, right? So this was this. America's in a state of infancy, and by state of infancy, it was difficulty all across the board, political, social, economical, whatever, right? So all those difficulties. Okay, so A says characterize the United States' decision to seek independence. No, I mean no. It's not about their decision. It's about how bad they sucked, right? Emphasize the inexperience of Americans in navigating their new political position. Yeah, this is possible, right? Acknowledge the naivete. Okay, so that sounds okay. Naivete of Americans. Oh, that's good. In believing in an equitable society? Well, okay, no one wanted. Okay, equitable is. Okay, equitable means fair society. Well, it wasn't necessarily about. Like this was not an issue, right? What was I mean, yeah, they wanted liberty and stuff like that, but we never talked about an equitable society. But anyway, like he's not trying to acknowledge this is like a concession first of all, and this one is not mentioned, and it's more like he's trying to say that this leads to some problems and that kind of thing. So B is much better than C. What about D? Criticize the United States. Okay, so he's not necessarily criticizing anybody. He's just explaining stuff. So I'm not going to say criticize. So I'm going to say B here. Okay, so 35. Warren implies that after Americans won independence, they questioned whether they would be. Okay, so. Do I have a line reference for this? Okay, so if you don't have a line reference for this, it might, so if you have a line reference question, it means that it could be relatively difficult to find out the answer. But if it doesn't have a line reference question, it means that you can use your general understanding of the passage in order to solve that question. That should happen, that's what should happen ideally. That's why they don't have line reference questions for some of the questions, because it's one of the central claims. It's one of the central reasoning, okay? So, all right, so after Americans won independence, they questioned whether they would be Right? So it's the Americans questioning whatever, right? Okay, so I guess there's this uncertainty, right? So this is my first bet, right? So they are now independent and they are free, but they're still in a state of infancy. And there's also that uncertainty, whether they could make the laws agreeable or they could consolidate the union, that kind of thing, okay? So let's take a look. A says, forced to rejoice. What? This is completely irrelevant. I've never read anything like this. You should be able to eliminate this one, right? Nobody, okay, nowhere in the passage does it mention Great Britain. It's just completely irrelevant. You should be able to see that. What about be able to return to the what? It's talking about jobs? No, right? This is also irrelevant. C, able to create a political system that appeases all citizens. Okay, so this is talking about the agreeableness. This is it, this rephrased, okay? Appeases all citizens. Well, what do you mean appease all citizens? Yeah, that's what agreeableness means, right? Okay, what about D? Beholden to other countries because of the, what? Okay, I do remember seeing debt, right? We did talk about the financial difficulties, the debt and stuff, but beholden to other countries, right? They're dependent on other countries? Well, we never talked about other countries, right? This is completely irrelevant. So D is not the answer. So it should be C. Oh, so it is A, B, C here. A, B, C. Wow. You did hit jackpot. So who chose A for 36? No one? Oh, okay, good. So American knowledge of different areas of study with their contrasts Americans. Oh, okay, so it's not, okay, so you shouldn't be confused with A. Anyway, so he's saying there's a contrast between what? Americans' knowledge of different areas of study. So this was the part where it mentioned, hey, Americans might be better informed in literature, right? So remember this part? Yeah, US people are better informed, but what do they not understand? They don't understand mankind. They don't understand laws. They don't understand government. So that's what you should be looking for. And here you go. Human nature. They don't understand mankind. So Warren characterizes Americans of the post-Revolutionary War period as, okay, so this is Warren looking at Americans. So Warren looking at Americans and he's saying, hey, these people are naive and idealistic, or aimless and neglected, imaginative and resourceful. Okay, so I want to look for something that's negative, first of all. Okay, so you don't want to say this, right? Imaginative and resourceful, hey, come on. Like, that's way too positive for what he said, right? Learned and cultured, I mean, this is possible. Hey, actually, this one is possible, though. Why? Because of this. You should remember this. The US people are better informed in literature, so they are learned and cultural. So if I have that in the line reference in the next question, that could potentially be an answer. Potentially, D, right? Anyway, well, I'm just going through like a preliminary pass before I go to the line reference. But I'm just thinking, naive and idealistic. This sounds pretty awesome, right? This is what we've been going for the whole time, right? They don't know what's about to happen. They have some knowledge of like whatever, liberty or whatever. Aimless. I don't know. I don't know about, well, even if you say aimless is okay, what about neglected? Well, what? Or like, does anybody need to take care of them or whatever? Neglected? Well, I don't know why they would mention neglected. So the primary issue is between naive and idealistic and learned and cultured. So now I'm going to go to the line reference question and I'm going to check which one is there actually. Okay, so what do I want to do? Just go. Why don't we try with try with D first? 62 to 69. Maybe acquire today and all blah blah blah. Okay, so this is talking about today, but tomorrow the world. But okay, so well, this part he was talking about like you know, mankind might change, right? Mankind might change, but he's not talking about Americans specifically here. So I do not want to choose this one, right? So this is not. So I'm looking at A, B, C, D, but I can cross out the line reference D here. And what's the other one? Okay, 30 to 35. They were ignorant of the intrigues of courts, and though convinced of the necessity of government, did not yeah, ignorant, did not fully understand, right? So this one could be idealistic and naive, right? So I'm saying, okay, so this one could be the idealistic bit, but I want to make sure. I want to look at the other ones, and I want to make sure that I don't have learned and cultured in there. If there is, there's another thing that I want to think about, right? I need to think a little bit more. I need to narrow the scope down a little bit. So anyway, 25 to 28. So I do have that. Better informed in many branches of literature. 25 to 28. So this one potentially could be learned and cultured. So I do have that. Now, what's A? A is 19. Is it 19? The line reference? Okay, 1924. If established, would be a minister agreeable to laws, blah, 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 blah. Okay, well, this has nothing to do with the characteristic of Americans. So it's either B or C. So now you need to think, okay? So let's go back to the question. Now you need to narrow the scope down a little bit, okay? So Warren characterizes Americans of the post-Revolutionary War period as, okay, so there's really nothing that you can do here, okay? I mean, like, it's not something new. I can't find anything else from this thing. Then what should you do here? So now you need to narrow the scope down a little bit more. We did this yesterday. Do you remember? Like now we looked at the individual words. We narrowed the scope down a little bit. I want to be a little bit more strict with this. Okay. So yeah, okay, learned is fine, but cultured? I mean, that's like a different thing. It's like enjoying plays and music and that kind of thing. So I mean, in the passage, there is that bit where they mention in 25, informed, but that's it. I look at this word and I say, yeah, this could be learned, right? But where can I find cultured? Can't. That's why you should go with idealistic and naive, okay? So it should be A and C here. 39, Warren claims that there is a historical pattern of governments that should serve as a warning to Americans, and that most successful governments, okay, so most successful governments, so this is what you should be thinking about. Okay, so where's the most successful government? Here, strong governments, okay, so how do they achieve that? Fraud and violence, right? So that's, I mean, okay, like, I don't know, like, I don't know if you guys could have done this, like, but what I mean is, okay, so this is not a paired question. Okay, so this one, like, they expect you to come to this realization right away. So if you need to go back to the passage and search for this, then you didn't probably look at the passage as it should be looked at. Okay, so like, I mean, I can't really say, like, when you see this, you should be able to think, I remember something like this, right? They should, you know, usually they deceive people and that kind of thing. So that's what you should be looking for. And so I'm going to use fraud violence, right? Fraud violence. Reluctant to impose constraints? Nope. Unable to discontinue policy? Nope. I want fraud. I want violence. Enabled by their citizens' blind trust. Well, it's not because of their trust. Willing to use treachery or intimidation? Yeah. Fraud and violence here. So D is the right answer. What about 40? Okay, so 40 is a line reference question, but they already have the statement that you should find within the question itself, right? So what's the statement? After the war, Americans wanted a political system that did not require much of them. You want this. So, I mean, you want to find exactly this statement. I'm not saying like find a statement that's supporting this statement or a statement from which I can make an inference or something like that. I'm saying you need to find this exact statement. Americans wanted a political system, right? So these three elements. That political system is what? No requirements, right? I mean, not no requirements, but not a lot of requirements, right? So Americans wanted political system without any requirements. I mean, not without any, but less requirements, right? So let's take a look at 39. 39. Okay, so I mean, no, this part is talking about strong governments, so this is completely irrelevant. What about B? Where's B? 48. These they had free, okay, so Americans are mentioned. They have freely lavished to secure their equality of condition, their easy modes of subsistence, and their exemption. Here we go. Their exemption from public burdens. So this is requirements rephrased, right? Public burdens. There we go. So that's our answer right there. Okay, so these are questions that you absolutely cannot get wrong, especially, right? It's not even that they have like a question 39 asking about this. It's that they're just asking you to find this exact statements within the passage. It's pretty easy, right? So you should be able to do that. 41, secure. So secure, I mean, what is it? Like what, secure liberty or what was it? Secure their equality. Okay, so I mean, secure used in the most superficial sense, guarantee, right? The last paragraph states that rulers are appointed through deceptive means and, okay, so deceptive means and what? All right, so this one you can go back, right? It's pretty limited and it's pretty detailed too, right? So rulers are appointed by, number one, deceptive means plus something else, right? So what is that other thing? So I want to look for something that's used in conjunction with deception to ensure rulers being appointed. I do remember this. Like, so the ruler is the hereditary crowns. This is hereditary crowns rephrased into rulers, right? So I want to look at the last paragraph. So let's take a look at the last paragraph. Hereditary crowns, this blah, blah, blah. All right, so I think it's this statement, right? Because here I see deception. Here I also see, where's that? Hereditary crowns. So this is it, right? So something works in conjunction with the game of deception. So I want to find that. Deception is played over and over to mislead the judgment of men and work on their enthusiasm until by their own consent. Okay, so it's so I'm gonna say it's either their enthusiasm, right? Or their judgment, or their own consent, right? So these are the things that work along with deception to ensure hereditary crowns being appointed. Right? So that's what I'm going to look for. Enthusiasm, consent, I already forgot. Okay, so this is something that you shouldn't do. Enthusiasm, consent, judgment. Well, no, right? Like, no. It's just not here. This economic equality, no, it's just not. Persuasive ideologies, no, come on, right? Their enthusiasm, their judgment, or their consent. Bartering, what? Bartering with other leaders? There we go. Consent, compliance, right? So so if you can't rephrase consent into compliance, then you can't solve this question. So that's D, right? Okay, any questions? Of course not. Why would I think there would be any questions? Okay, so let's, after the break, let's take a look at the last passage, and if we have some time left, I'm gonna take a look at some of the history passages that you guys did this morning, or hopefully. Did you? Did you not? Okay. What was the first passage? What are the starting words?
History of Great Britain.
History of Great Britain, okay. All right, let's take a quick break. passage. All right. Passage 1, carnivore way. Okay, I don't know what that means, but coexisting with and conserving North America's predators. Okay, so it's about predators coexisting. I don't really know. Okay, I'm not really sure. Passage 2 is about missing links and trophic cascades. Okay, I don't know what this thing means. TC, well, what is that? Okay, so, but you should know what the word cascade means. What's a cascade? So, okay, usually when I say cascade, it's like a cascade of events. It's a series of events. Like, so some kind of chain reaction that happens, right? So like a series of things that happen. So trophic cascades in food webs, a reply to ripple. What's ETAL? You guys know what this is?
Is it kind of like? Actually, no, it's not. I was thinking of like etc. or something like this. Like.
Well, it's similar. It means and others. Usually when you do a study, it's not one person, right? You have one main guy, and then you have other researchers helping that guy or like co-authors. So, but you know, you don't want to mention them all the time. Like that would be too worthy, right? So you usually just say it all, and then that means and others. Okay. Anyway, so I have no idea what it's going to be about, but it's going to be about like predators, and then I have links, and then I have something called trophic cascades. I don't know what that is. Okay, so let's take a look. But it actually defined trophic cascade for us. What does it say? So this is the definition of trophic cascade, so you definitely need to know this. Especially when it's mentioned in the pronoun, you need to know it. Trophic cascade occurs when, okay, so what's when? A presence of a predator, okay, so predator decreases the population of its prey, okay? Thereby, okay, so predator, cause and effect, right? So predator does what? It decreases its prey, thereby increasing the numbers of organisms at the next lower level. So at the next lower level, so there's like prey grade A, but there's like prey grade B. So this increases, right? So I mean, if you look at the food chain, it's like this. Okay, so you have like in this passage they talk about wolves, right? So wolves are like high up there, right? And then like you have something else like lynx or something, and then something like something else. Like so these 2 eats 3 and 1 eats 2, right? So what happens if the predators? I mean so there's gonna be predators, and then so 2 is gonna decrease, but because 2 decreases, 3 is going to increase. This is what a trophic cascade is, right? Did you guys get that? Right? Okay, so that's what a trophic cascade is. It's probably going to be talking about that chain reaction that happens. Okay, so let's go to the passage. So passage 1 in the early 2000s. Okay, so it started off talking about the year numbers. So I want to take good care of this. I don't want to fall into the trap of not being able to organize my passage. So, okay, so this is what this, it's not recent, right? If it says early 2000s, right? So this is probably going to be something old, right? There's probably going to be something new, relatively newer. This person is not going to write, I mean, this passage is written in 2014. So, I mean, I don't feel like he's going to present something in the early 2000s as like a new development. So I'm pretty sure that this is going to be something old. So what happened? Wolves began to drift down from Canada and across the border from Idaho into Washington State. Hey, can you imagine what's going to happen? So it's going to be a trophic cascade, I guess. Because, I mean, this is probably going to be a predator. This is my guess. Okay, so I'm not saying this is right just yet. But I'm saying when you're reading this, you want to actively connect this information to what you have. So what we have is that trophic cascade idea, right? That chain reaction. So you want to think about this in terms of that, right? Okay, so that's, so wolves began to drift down. So they came to, from Idaho into Washington state. So they came here. This natural wolf recolonization. Okay, recolonization, they're claiming the area again, right? Okay, so they're claiming the area and then inspired ecologists such as W.R. and colleagues to conduct an exercise in scientific thinking to consider potential impacts. Okay, notice how it said potential. Did it say definitive? No, right? So they don't know for sure, right? So this person's just guessing, right? They're guessing what? The potential impacts. That an apex, what's apex? Like top, yeah. So wolves are like top predators, right? I guess in this area, wolves are top predators. There's no other animal that beats the wolves or something like that, right? Their apex predator, like the wolf, would have on the intricate workings of the lynx snowshoe hare food web. Oh, okay. So what's going to be the impact on that ecosystem, right? I think I already know. Probably going to say trophic cascade, right? So the wolves eat the lynx or something like that, and then preys at the next level, they're going to increase, something like that. Okay. So at the time, Washington had low hare and lynx populations and a high coyote population. Okay. So I want to find out like who the wolves are going to eat, right? I'm not sure, but I mean, let's just take a look. Coyotes had recently expanded their range. Range is the place, I mean, when you're talking about range of animals, right? We talked about this, right? Free range chickens. You guys remember that? Yeah. So range is like, you know, where do they live, right? So expanded the range and abundance there. Wolves prey on coyotes. Okay, there we go, right? Okay, so it's like this, right? We have wolves, and then we have coyotes, and probably the next are going to be the lynx or something like that, right? What if the wolves return to the Pacific Northwest could indirectly improve lynx conservation, right? So that's the potential impact. So they were saying, hey, we see this, right? We see the increase of wolves. We increase in the number of wolves. So is this going to decrease coyotes and increase lynx? Will that trophic cascade happen, right? So that's, we want to think about the potential impact of wolves into this area, right? So this was the question, and Ripple, this guy, was trying to answer this, okay? So let's see what happens. Ripple and colleagues hypothesize. Okay, notice how it said hypothesize. It's not for sure, right? It's a hypothesis. So what's the hypothesis? Two mechanisms would drive wolf, coyote, lynx, snowshoe, hare, trophic cascades. Okay, so their hypothesis is this. This would happen. A trophic cascade would happen. And we know what that is, because it said so in the prologue, right? First, by killing coyotes, wolves would reverse the mesopredator release that had occurred. Okay, so what's mesopredator release? What's this MR thing? I don't know. That occurred when wolves had been extirpated from this region nearly a century earlier. Okay, so I guess extirpated here means they left the area, right? So they were wondering if this is going to reverse the effect of wolves leaving this area a century earlier. When humans hunted wolves to extinction, they removed an important check on coyote numbers. Okay, so I guess this is expanding on the MR idea, right? So creating a release on the number of this mid-sized predator. Okay, so what's the mesopredator release that happened? So the MR that happened is the number of coyotes increased. Coyotes increased, and coyote numbers increased, which put more pressure on lynx. All right. So All right, so first let's talk about the hypothesis before we go on more. So the hypothesis is trophic cascade is going to happen, right? So what happens when there's a trophic cascade? Wolves numbers are going to affect coyotes. So coyotes are going to go down, and then the lynx population is going to go up. This is this was their hypothesis. And then in order to explain this, we were talking about that mesopredator release. And what's that mesopredator release? This was something that happened beforehand, right? So when the wolves left, the coyotes' numbers increased, right? So wolves left. This increased the number of coyotes, and then it put pressure on the lynx population, right? So we were wondering if this thing, can we reverse this? Right? That was a question, right? Can we reverse this? Therefore, by reducing coyotes in the system, a returning wolf population could indirectly create ecological benefits for lynx. Okay, so there we go. I want to just circle this, right? This seems to be going along with our trophic cascade idea. The researchers further hypothesized, okay, so this is another hypothesis, that because coyotes also prey on lynx, a reduction of coyote numbers by wolves would release predation pressure on lynx. Okay, so release pressure means put off the pressure, right? So lynx populations, they're going to be positively affected, right? They might increase or that kind of thing, right? Okay, so that's what they wondered. So what I was thinking, usually when we have a hypothesis, what do we have right after that? Usually we have an experiment or a study that either confirms that hypothesis or says it's wrong. But I don't get that in this passage. I don't have that experiment. What do I have? Second, okay, okay, what do you mean? Second in Western North America, South blah, 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 wolves prey primarily on elk. Okay, so this is like a completely new scenario, right? So this was the first scenario, I guess, us talking about wolves, coyotes, and lynx, but now we have, like, we're talking about a brand new area, right? Wolves prey primarily on elk and deer. Okay, so elk and deer. When elk and deer numbers are high, these herbivores can suppress shrubs. Oh, okay, so now it's like a whole new thing. It's like wolves, and then deer and elk, and then shrubs. Right? So now I'm in pretty familiar territory because it's probably going to be talking about that trophic cascade idea again, right? So if wolves are again reintroduced into this area, the deer and elk population is going to go down, and then the shrub population is going to go up. So something like that. Okay, so what did they hypothesize? That the wolves' return would reduce elk and deer, yes, and also change their behavior, as has been found. Okay, so this is something additional, right? So their behavior changes because there's wolves around, as has been found in places like Yellowstone by JL, okay, so JL and others. Elk and deer need to stay alert in order to survive. Okay, so that's why their behavior change, right? This means keeping their heads up and spending less time standing in one spot as they typically do in no wolves, when there are no wolves in a system, right? Okay, so they move around a lot more, and they're kind of wary, right? Because there are wolves around. Via this predation risk mechanism, wolves could indirectly reduce browsing pressure on shrubs. Oh, okay. So the deers, they don't have time to look for shrubs now, right? So that could potentially increase the shrubs. And also change behavior. Get this? Right? All right. Which would improve snowshoe hare habitat, thereby benefiting lynx. Okay. Well, that's eventually also going to benefit the lynx. Okay. So this chain. Okay. So what's? All right. We're done. All right, so did we confirm the hypothesis in that passage? No. They just presented two hypotheses and they said, yeah, this is it. Didn't test it, we don't know if it's for sure, right? So passage 2 is probably, so it can go either way now. Since passage 1 only mentioned the hypothesis, passage 2 could be a passage that is testing that theory and say, oh, it's then it can be right or it can be wrong, right? Or another scenario is just contradict it, right? Right from the get-go, just say, hey, you guys were wrong, right? So those are my initial thoughts before I go into passage 2. So when you're reading passage 2, especially in science passages, you want to think about the ideas in terms of what you've read in passage 1. Do they have any common ground? Do they disagree on issues? If so, like how do they disagree? That's how you should look when you're reading passage 2. Okay, so let's take a look. Ripple correctly state. Okay, so it's talking about the same scientist, I guess. So that's a common ground, right? So we were talking about Ripple the entire time in passage 1. So here, right? Ripple correctly state. Okay, so they were right about something. Wolves can affect coyotes. All right, so this was right. As shown by blah, 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 blah. However, okay, here we go, right? So it's saying that, yeah, they did correctly state that wolves can affect coyotes. However, despite the well-publicized initial declines in coyote abundance, coyotes may now be adapting to wolves. Oh, okay, so that's like the key idea that I need to take away here, right? So that's like the main thing that passage 2 is mentioning so far, right? So he's saying like, yeah, Ripple did say that the wolves are going to cause a decline